God bless you and welcome back to our study in the Word. We've been looking at Hebrews chapter 11 and the heroes of faith. Today we're looking at Jacob's son Joseph, and his life is written about in the Old Testament book of Genesis. But before we look at Joseph's life, let's look at the definition of faith that is found in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. The writer of Hebrews now comes to Joseph, and when Joseph was about to die, he spoke with absolute confidence about something that would happen in the future. Let's look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 22a. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. Joseph said with confidence that the people of Israel would leave Egypt. And this was long before Israel would be enslaved in Egypt. This was at least 400 years before Israel would begin their Exodus journey to the land that God had promised to Abraham. We know Joseph was Jacob's favored son. Joseph had dreams of his own leadership and greatness, but his brothers were jealous of him. They betrayed him by selling him into bondage in Egypt and lied and told their father that Joseph was destroyed by wild animals. But Joseph was put in prison for a number of years. But God had another plan for his life. By faith, Joseph was able to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh. God's hand was upon Joseph, and he raised him up to the number 2 position in all of Egypt. He was one of the most powerful men in the world at that time. Joseph helped prepare Egypt for a coming famine that would last 7 years. All nations surrounding Egypt were suffering greatly from this famine. But under Joseph's wise management, Egypt stored up sufficient grains and food resources that would last through the entire 7 years of the famine. Joseph's brothers heard that there was food in Egypt, and so they came to purchase food. We learn that eventually Joseph's father Jacob and all the rest of the family come to Egypt to live, and Joseph is able to care for them there. And he and his brothers are eventually reconciled one to another. The point of our study is that Joseph knew that God had given his great-grandfather Abraham a promise. And Joseph believed God's covenant promise that he and his descendants would inherit what we know today as Israel, the promised land. By confident faith, Joseph knew that all of Israel would leave Egypt and go to the land that God had promised them as their inheritance. It didn't matter how long it took. Here's the instruction that Joseph gave. And this is the entirety of Hebrews 11, verse 22. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. Joseph gave this command: when you leave Egypt to settle in the land that God promised, be sure to take my bones with you. That's a great portrait of confidence in God. That's faith. It's an example of being certain about what we cannot see, what we don't have yet. It's faith that makes us feel certain that we've already got it. Even when we cannot see it yet, that's the kind of faith that Joseph had. And in the book of Acts, Stephen, the first Christian martyr, preaches before he is stoned to death for his faith in Jesus Christ. And he talks about Joseph, and he talks about Jacob's bones being returned to the promised land just as they had requested. Here's what Acts chapter 7 verses 15 and 16 says. So Jacob went to Egypt. He died there, as did our ancestor. Their bodies were taken to Shechem and buried in the tomb that Abraham had bought for a certain price from Hamor's sons in Shechem. Shechem is, of course, in the promised land. Both Jacob and Joseph's bones were returned and buried in the tomb of Abraham. We serve a God who has made a covenant with us. In the Old Testament, he made a covenant with Abraham. But in the New Testament, he's made a covenant, an eternal covenant with you and I through the blood of his Son, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross and who made that work perfect by his resurrection from the dead. And even though in Joseph's case, it took hundreds of years for that covenant to be established, God does not forget his promises. Not to Joseph, not to the patriarchs, and not to you and I. God doesn't forget the prayers that we've prayed in his name, even if they're 10 years back or 25 years back, because he is a covenant-keeping God. He loves us. He will not abandon us. He will finish what he has started in our lives because he does not forget. Because Jesus Christ rose from the dead, he lives. He's alive. And he helps us through his Spirit. And the Spirit of God gives us the gift of faith. Here's the thing. The faith that we're giving is the same faith of Abraham, the same faith of Isaac and Joseph and the others, and Jacob and the others. It's the kind of faith that fills us with God's strength. It's the kind of faith that establishes us, that we can be on a firm foundation. We're not moved by the things that happen around us because we are established in God. God keeps his word. God keeps his promises. He will never leave us without his blessings being fulfilled in our lives just as he has promised. Not only that, but those blessings will be on us, but on our children and our children's children. I want to live in that kind of faith. I want to walk in that faith. I want to believe God for the things that I cannot see. And I want that for you as well. May the Lord continue to bless you as we are studying in Hebrews chapter 11, the portraits of these heroes of faith. May God keep you and bless you. Amen.